Hi folks, and welcome back to Fishing with Den. Well, if you watched last week's video, you saw me doing a bit of margin fishing. I had quite a few fish, really good time, but the purpose of the session was to test out this. This is my new homemade margin float. I could have just got one from the tackle shop, cost about £2 each, or $3–4 if you're in America or Australia. But in the end I decided to make my own because first of all they're cheaper, but really for me they're just much more fun. So today I'm going to show you how to make them. First of all then, you're going to need some round balsa dowel. This is 9mm, and you can get that either from the local DIY store, or if they don't sell it where you live, just go to a model shop and they tend to have all different diameters. You're also going to need some of this. This is 0.8 spring steel, also known as piano wire, as you see. It's great if you can get hold of stainless steel, because then you won't have to paint it, but generally these ones I've been able to get are just piano wire, and it is spring steel, but I'm going to have to paint over it because otherwise it's going to go rusty. Still pretty cheap to buy, and again from the local model shop. And the only other thing you're going to need is a packet of these barbecue skewers, which cost hardly anything at the local store. Okay, let's get started then. This first one that I made, I thought it was going to be 0.4 grams, which it kind of almost was until I'd got all the paint on it, so you have to allow for that. So this was something of a prototype, and now I'm going to be making a slightly bigger version than this to become the 0.4 grams, and probably this size to make it a 0.3 grams. And to do that, and I've lost the bits, here we are, I've cut myself a couple of pieces of this balsa wood. This is 20mm, this is 25mm, and let's now show you how we go about putting all this together. And I've decided to make 3 sets of each float, purely and simply because it saves me time. At some point I'm going to lose one of these floats, so if I've got a couple of spares, it just saves me the aggravation of having to come back and build them all separately. Here we go then. First things first, take a piece of the balsa and you need to find the centre. This is my homemade centre finder. There is a video on this and I'll put a link in the description box down below for you. But basically, put that in there, take your pencil and just, I'll try and do this upside down for you. Pull a line up, whoops, pull a line up, turn it around a little, like so. Maybe one more. Can't see what I'm doing here at the moment, but hopefully I've got this right for you. And then you've got 3 lines, and you can see the point in the middle where it all comes together, and that's the center point. And do that for each of them, and then you know where you're starting from. You're not going to be off center right from the very start. Do it at both ends, and then again you'll know exactly where you're going to be for putting in the cane and the spring steel stem section here. I'm lucky because I actually have my own homemade lathe here, which I made some years ago, and again, if you've watched any of my videos, you've probably seen me using this. Let's give myself a bit of slack. So I'm going to be able to just drill these and I shouldn't have any problems. For your purposes, you won't have one of these, but you can do it with a basic power drill. Now, again, I've done a video on how to use one of these and how to get the center, and I'll actually insert that into this video now. So if you've already seen that video and you know how to do this, please feel free to move along to the end of that section, and I'll put a link up at the bottom of the picture just to let you know exactly where to go to on the time scale, so you can miss that bit out. So the first thing is, don't just take your standard battery operated screwdriver, put a 2mm drill bit in it, and then try and drill through the center. You will actually end up doing this and it'll come out off center at the other end. The idea is to try and secure this down to the bench somehow. Now I found the easiest way to secure the battery operated drill screwdriver is just to take a clamp and clamp it in a position so it's parallel to the bench here. Take off the battery pack for now, and then you'll be putting on either tape or a cable tie or something to hold the trigger in position. Then when you put this back on, it'll start up. Now, as you can see, I've also taken a couple of pieces of scrap wood so that they're just fractionally lower than halfway. And what I'm going to do is offer that up. Now obviously I'm doing this all backwards here, but the point of the drill goes into the center, and now I can actually gauge roughly where I am in terms of keeping this parallel. So I can take it into the drill, then take it back the other way and drill from the other side. Never try and drill all the way through, because that's going to mean it comes out slightly offset here. Obviously this is just a piece of scrap, but really this will give you quite a good result. So here's the first body. I just put that into the V here. Sorry, this is going to get loud. Just push it through to about the halfway point. Don't go any further than halfway, because remember, we're going to be inserting some of this 2mm cane into there for the tip, and then we're going to be inserting this 0.8 wire into the other end. And obviously if you drill all the way through, this is going to woggle around and you're never going to get that to stay in there. So I'll just drill the rest of these very quickly, and then I'll show you how to put the wire in. So for the wire stem pieces then, you'll probably find that 0.8 doesn't fit into your chuck. So all I've done is I've just taken a piece of electrical tape, just wound it around, and now I can put it in. Now obviously, even if I wind it down fairly tight, that's not going to hold too tightly. But then we're not going to be using the drill part, as you see. What we're going to do is we're going to take this, and all I'm going to do is just push it onto that rod. That way it'll keep it straight. Now for those of you obviously that don't have one of these, go back to that setup we had with the battery operated drill, and you can do very much the same thing there. But on your one you can gauge it against the flat piece of wood and on the edge of the wood as well, and just push it in to about halfway point. If this one goes through a little bit further into the 2mm hole, well, that doesn't really matter because the 2mm hole is bigger anyway. But make sure you get plenty in. You don't want to only have 3 or 4 millimeters in there. Get sort of as much as sort of 10 or 12 millimeters in there, so you get a good grip on the balsa wood. So as you see, all I'm going to do is push that in like so, and if I take it out with a bit of luck, I spin that around. As you see, it's pretty much straight. There's a little bit of a woggle because I'm holding onto this thing down here, but that's as good as I need it to be, and that's all you need to do too. Having taken that out, I've cut a piece off here. Don't worry about sizes of the stem and the tip at the moment. If I just put this into here very briefly, I've just put a pointy end on the piece of bamboo, and I've cut this off at probably something like 60 millimeters. Totally arbitrary for the moment. All I'm going to do is to get that in there, and as you see, you've got the basis of your float there. I've obviously got to shape the body, but before I do any of that, I'm going to get some epoxy glue, in this case araldite, and I'm going to glue all of the tips and stems onto the thing. With regard for the stems though, be aware, because obviously these will probably have grease and all sorts of other stuff on there. Give those a bit of a rub down with, I've lost my piece of, here we go, sandpaper, coarse sandpaper. Just give it a rub down, just rough up everything and make sure you've actually cleared off any dirt and grease, because you want to make sure you've got, ouch, you want to make sure you've got a good key for the glue. This one is again fairly arbitrary in length. It's probably about 110, 120 millimeters long. And the reason for that is that I can adjust all of the tips and the stems at the end. I can just chop them off, and then they'll be fine and correct to the length. I'm just about to mix the glue up, but before I do that, a couple of things to let you know. I've sanded all 6 of these wire stems, and I've also put a little point on the end of them so they go in neatly. And similarly, I've just given these tips a little bit of a sand as well for the same reason. Be aware also that this 5-minute epoxy, this araldite, it may say 5 minutes, but that doesn't mean you get 5 minutes of usable time with it. So my advice is don't try and mix all this up and expect to do everything in one go. So this isn't rocket science, guys. All you do, take that, dip it in the end, don't put too much on, and then just push it in to about sort of 10 millimeters or so. Now, something to be aware of is that you don't want to have any of this excess on the float when you're actually sanding it down. So get rid of it now, otherwise it'll go nice and hard and you won't be able to sand it properly. Okay, so that's the first one done, and I'll now get on and do the next 5. But rather than do them all in that way, just to show you a complete float, take this, get about 10 millimeters on it. You've already got the hole, but be careful, because even though you have it, it's still possible to make yourself another hole, so you're not sure of what you're doing, so you're not sure of exactly whether it's straight or not. So get that in, and then give it a quick twizzle. As you see, that's pretty good. It's all the way in. And again, make sure you wipe off as much of the excess glue as you possibly can. You've got to make it easy for yourself when you're doing the sanding down. So there you go, that's the first one. I'll crack on and do the next one and the rest of the floats, and then I'll come back to you and we'll talk about how we shape the floats. It's about half an hour later, and the glue's set up enough now to be able to work the body in the lathe. So for me, I just put it in, and I'll show you how I do the shaping in a second. But for you guys, insofar as you're doing it on that clamp down drill on the bench, it's pretty much the same sort of thing. You're going to turn it on, make sure you hold the wire stem to stop it from waggling around, because otherwise it'll just get bigger and bigger loops, because it's never going to be absolutely perfectly straight. But let me show you how I do mine. Just gently hold the edge on, as you can see me doing here, and round it off. Let me turn this off a second, and I'm going to round it off on both ends. Now, you don't want to make this a thin float. You need to keep as much of the thickness in the body as you can, because you want something that's almost bulletproof. If you're fishing for carp, this thing's going to take an awful lot of punishment. So let me just finish this one off, and I'll show you what we end up with. Okay, so that's it. Doesn't take very long to do each one, but as I say, I've got 5 more to do, so I'll just get on with doing those, and then we'll take it on to the next stage. So with all the shaping done, normally around about now, I'd be starting to fit little eyes or rings in the side here to take the line so it comes off the top of the body of the float. Now, as we've said all along, these things need to be robust. So instead of that, what I've done is, this is one I had made up. This is the 0.2 of a gram float from previously. I've just taken a piece of silicone rubber, just wet that a bit. You can see the line going through. Just push that down onto the float, pull tight, and now we've got a really robust method of holding the line to the tip. Now, as you saw from last week's video, I put this float through an awful lot of pressure, and nothing happened with that silicone rubber. Now, before we get to painting, there's just a couple of extra bits of trim up jobs we have to do. I've already done them on these floats, and basically the smaller ones, I've trimmed the stems down to 70 millimeters, and the longer ones, the stems are 75 millimeters. There's no particular reason for that, other than the fact that we want some fairly short floats, but we need them to be stable. Now, had these been for fishing out in open water, these stems would have been somewhat longer to provide even more stability. But if we're only fishing in a foot of water, you can't keep these too long. As far as the tips go, as you can see, I've cut them all to about 25mm or 1 inch. I've rounded over the tops, and I've given both the stems and the tips just another very, very light sanding, just to remove any grease. And of course, now I've just picked these up, I'm going to have to do that again on the stems. Now, if you haven't done this before, this is probably a good time to check the shot carrying capacity of the floats. This is one of the ones that was going to be 0.4 of a gram. Now, the reason you're checking is because sometimes it may be that you haven't taken enough off the body of the float here, or alternatively you may have taken too much off, and so that will adversely affect the shot carrying capacity. So what I've done, I've just taken a small piece of line, I put 5 number 6 shot on it, which is 0.5 of a gram, and remember we want this one to be 0.4 of a gram. I'll just put this into the silicone here so it sits on there, and I grab my float tube, and if this takes 0.5 of a gram, which it looks like it does completely correctly, that's great. If it takes 0.5 of a gram, that's about right. Now, I know I said we're looking for this float to be 0.4 of a gram, but of course we're going to be putting paint on and varnish and so on, and that will actually reduce the shot carrying capacity a little bit. Don't worry that you've just put this in as an unvarnished float, because obviously it's going to soak up a little bit of water. It's only been in for a couple of seconds, and basically just dab it down with a cloth and then just put it on one side to dry for a short while. And as in this case, that does take 5 shots, which is 0.5 of a gram. So I'm perfectly happy that by the time I've got this dried out and painted, this will be 0.4 of a gram. So painting then, as always with my floats these days, very simple. I just use some of this spray paint, which is for metal, wood and plastic. I give it a first coat, and then I sand down between coats and give it a second coat. After that, it gets a final coat of polyurethane varnish, and we're good to go. Oh, apart from the painting the tip, of course. But from the safety perspective, make sure you wear a mask, and make sure that the room's well ventilated, because this stuff is actually quite nasty, and you wouldn't want this to get into your lungs. I've got both garage doors open, so let's get on with it, shall we? So if you hold the float by the tip, and then just spray, give it a good coat all the way around, make sure you cover the top and the bottom. Don't worry if you haven't caught the very top of the float. We're going to be covering that in white paint followed by red paint anyway, so now this can get put away in the rack ready to dry. I've given it about an hour, and the paint's pretty much dry now, as much as it needs to be anyway. Obviously I'd need to leave it overnight for it to be properly hard, but what I'm going to do is just take a piece of this 600 grit wet and dry and just take off any sort of rough areas on there. There's one or two, and it's just a question of smoothing it out. Very simple to do. It's literally just a very soft rub over with this wet and dry, just to make it look nice. Really, it would probably work just as well even if I didn't do this. So that's the second coat of black paint dry now, and as you can see I've already put on 2 coats in fact of this white undercoat. I prefer to have 2, because if you only put 1 sometimes you don't get proper coverage, and a completely covered white base coat makes the red stand out better. Now this is a water-based one which I happened to pick up from the tackle shop, but acrylic probably works just as well, and you can get that from all sorts of craft shops. Just literally going to paint the top by hand. Make sure you don't get too much on, you don't want it to be dripping. And again, I'll do 2 coats of this. And everything's now ready for a final coat of varnish, and that'll be the last thing I do for this afternoon. I'm going to use this exterior clear polyurethane varnish. This is actually a marine varnish, and I find that by putting this on, it gives me a really tough extra coat, exterior coat rather, which seems to help with the robustness of the float. So that's pretty much it then, folks. That's how I make my margin floats. The only final thing I've got to do is I'm going to take this marker and I'm going to write the shot loading on the side of the body here. In this case, 0.4 of a gram. And then I'll just get that spray varnish and just literally spray that little bit to cover it. I find if you don't cover this, it fades over a period of time. So just a little patch of sprayed varnish over the top, or indeed if you've got varnish that you can use with a paintbrush, just add that on. And then that's it, job done. So, hope you enjoyed it as usual. If you did, click the like button. If you want to subscribe, as always, you can do that too. And until the next time, bye for now.